Hello, welcome to AI Playbook, and today we'll be looking at AI and data privacy compliance. Now, when we talk about AI and privacy compliance, what are the things that we are looking for? Well, that's part of the conversation today. Pretty much when we look at the space of artificial intelligence, there are several global framework that is trying to curb the use of artificial intelligence. And when we look at some of this framework, well, some of them were there even before the AI bubble. However, most of this protection or this framework are trying to catch up with how the technology work. But hey, if you understand how all of these things work, it will make your work a whole lot easy, especially if you're trying to create something that will be usable, not just within your location, but outside of where you are. Then it is important that you understand the data protection or data compliance when it comes to artificial intelligence as well. So pretty much when we look at it, we need to when we look at the framework. So if we say AI and data compliance. Okay, so what are the aspects that we are looking at? Now, we need to look at it from two directions. First, we need to look at AI from the global perspective. And of course, that will be global privacy frameworks. Okay, now, so what are the things that we need to consider when we talk about the global privacy framework? Of course, we need to then start looking at what are the things that nations have created for us to use. We need to look at GDPR is one of them. Okay, we also have CCPA. Okay, and that's for California. Let's just take a look at them. So we have GDPR, we have CCPA. That this is I think CCPA slash CPRA. This is for California. Well, this is for Europe. I think it's California there. This is for European Union. Then we also have LGPD. Okay, LGPD is for Brazil. LGPD, that will be for Brazil. We then have Popea, which is for South Africa. We then have, of course, Nigeria. That's NDPR. This is Nigeria. Okay, so now these are some of the framework in the world that currently we use to set data privacy benchmark. And this really depends on the region that your data will be consumed. So, but at the end of the day, having the fundamentals of how some of these things work really make a lot of sense. And there are similarity between all of these frameworks, how all of these frameworks work. You could see a couple of things as to how these frameworks work. So in looking at them, you could also, so when we look at some of this framework, we could say consent is one of them. Okay. Consent is one of them. Ensure that before you use somebody's data, you get their consent. One other thing that we can also look at is purpose limitation is another familiarity. Oftentimes, when you get people's data, how often what do you intend to do with those data? Okay, so purpose limitation is one of them. Okay, let me just get this off. Another thing to consider would be data minimization. Sometimes you don't need as much data as you collect. So the question is, How do you ensure that you are grabbing the data that you need? So data limitation is part of the similarity among all the frameworks that we have. Also, right to explanation. Okay, so right to explanation is part of it. When you look at it, are you able to explain the reasons why you're collecting all of those data? All these things are very, very important, especially if you find yourself in a very high regulated industry. So you need to look at the similarity among all of this. So every of the regulatory framework will ensure that you adhere to this very 4 points, which is very, very important. All right. So whenever you're trying to do anything, just understand that this framework would require that you put all of those things into consideration. Okay, so after that, the next thing is to look at the specific privacy challenges. Now, what are the privacy challenges that we have? Okay, when we talk about data compliance, what are the privacy challenges that we have? So let's take a look at some of the challenges that we have, and let's see how we can also mitigate those challenges. So if I also try to look at the challenges, all right. Okay, so we could also say, so the first thing on my list would be data paradox, right? Data paradox. And what do I mean by data paradox? Of course, you're looking at AI performance versus privacy preservation. So, how do you improve your artificial intelligence without actually using people's data? So, it's difficult because you need data to train every model. So, how do you manage data privacy when it comes to improving your model? How do you train? What are the training requirements? All of these things are things that, of course, they are difficult to have conversation about, but at the end of the day, they are challenges. So how do you ensure that your training data is not infringing other people's rights as to why you're using their information? Another thing is interference problem. Okay, so we also have interference problem, or inference problem rather, inference problems. And with this very problem, oftentimes your model may be exploited. And the question is, when every time your model brings out output, or when you deliver some sort of output to the user, is it possible that somebody can manipulate those things? Like, can I be chatting with an AI right now, and because of the output I am getting, somebody is able to either remotely make something happen and try to risk the sensitivity of my conversation. So some of these things are very important when you're starting off anything. What are the key issues around when a user interacts with your platform versus when somebody tries to interfere or manipulate what the person sees? All these things are very, very important. And especially when you try to combine multiple data together, how do you ensure that all these things really work in sync? Okay, but I mean, to make sense out of all of these things, then we can consider the technical approach. How do we do these things? What are the technical approach, and how can we properly initiate some of these things? Okay, let's take a look at it. So we're saying, what are the technical approach to some of these things? All right, so technical approaches will be finding a way to make your model distributed. So you can call it federated limitation. How do you ensure that it's not just in one place? Try to look at things from every perspective without compromising what you have. These are some of the things that you really need to take into consideration. And also aggregation method as well. How do you ensure that when you're putting all of these things together, they speak correctly to each other and not just working independently. All right. So you can think about it as a part of the technical approach is you think distributed systems. All right. So think about distributed systems and how do you ensure that everything works together. Also, you can also look at differential privacy. Differential privacy. Okay. Now, at this point, you're beginning to look at real world application, mathematical guarantees, privacy guarantees, and how do you ensure that everything you're doing is protected. At the end of the day, all of these things are one logic or the other. How do you ensure that all these things are properly integrated and work together? Now, when you then look at this technical approach, make it ensure that they are distributed, ensure that you also look at your differential privacy in terms of the mathematical terms, whatever you're using, your logic, ensure that you also listen to noise. The next is to look at the design methodology. Okay, what are the things that you should put into consideration? So if we look at this very well, so we could say what are the design methodology. Okay, so part of what you need to think from onset, like from day one, is ensure that you embed privacy from start. Okay, so think of data privacy from start, or we could just even say embed data privacy from start. Like there's no better time to infuse privacy into what you're doing. Just think about it. The moment you have anything to do, think privacy first. Otherwise, you will struggle in your implementation. You also need to understand privacy impact assessment. You also need to have privacy impact assessment. Okay. Then at this point, you need to engage stakeholders. You need to understand that, of course, AI specific risks needs to be analyzed. How do you mitigate in the event where something happens? All of those things have a very huge role to play. So, how do you cope with all of these things? From global framework to looking at the commonality between all of those, looking at the challenges, looking at the technical approach. Then, of course, your designing methodology. The next is to have a checklist. At the end of the day, what really help you is having a checklist to do all of these things. Because if you don't have a checklist, it will just be very difficult to implement any of these things. Okay, so when we look at, so we can call this privacy compliance checklist. Okay, under these, you can then have something like your assessment methodology. Okay, you can then have implementation tool. And when we look at your assessment methodology, there are also a couple of things to consider. You're looking at your system inventory, data flow mapping, processing purpose evaluation, and also retention policy. Are there anything or are there things that you're retaining? What are the policy guiding some of those things? And also implementation tools. Under implementation tool, you need to consider documentation of every process. You need to look at consent management option. How do you get people's consent to use their data for training? Also, data minimization techniques. How do you ensure that you don't overuse the data for what is intended for? Also, you need to look at subject access request handling. At what point do you manage subject access, and things like that. So all of these things will be part of what you have in your compliance checklist. I think in all of these things, we just need to think one thing. Artificial intelligence, of course, is very interesting when you embed it into existing system because it makes the whole work easier. But in wrapping this session up, some things that we need to consider is that data privacy will not just come down from the moon. We need to understand which region we're trying to work with and what really are those compliance description or framework from those region. We need to get the commonality among all of these compliance, which of course I listed here. Commonalities, you have a consent purpose limitation. You then have rights to explanation. A customer can reach out to you and ask you to explain how you're using their data. You should be able to explain that. We also have challenges. So challenges oftentimes, of course, are the paradox, data paradox. You need data to train your model. At the same time, you need to keep privacy of other people. So we looking at the technical approach, very important. You need to ensure that your system is distributed. It's not just in one place. Then your differential privacy as well, which talks about how what are the methodology that differentiate what you're doing, especially with other platform or with other models out there. Okay, then design methodology, which is very important. Then privacy compliance checklist. So at the end of the day, all of these things that we've spoken about, the most important thing is that you have this checklist at the end of the day. And one more thing I also need to say is don't forget, plan privacy from the beginning, from the get go. You don't need to really wait till the end. How do you protect user data? And you also need to try as much as you can to be transparent in what you do. It's very important to be transparent. Pretty much, this is how we wrap it up on the privacy, AI data privacy compliance segment of this very lesson. And next time, we would also look at building responsive or responsible AI system. So, what do you need to do to build a responsible artificial intelligence? And that's pretty much what we'll be looking at in the next lesson. Thank you for watching these. I hope this is helpful and you're able to put this into consideration in your next development. And that's how we wrap it up. If you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on all our social media handles so that you can be notified every time we release a new tip. My name is Noah Olatoye. Until next time, I'll see you in the next one.